Hi. George W. Knight III is now dealing with the argument that the first century cultural norms were at work in why Paul wrote the way he did about the relationship between husband and wife and the principle of submission. So this is how he addresses that. It is argued sometime that list of duties and responsibilities simply reflects the cultural approach of these matters found in the New Testament period, and that the apostle is simply asking for conformity to the practices of the day, so that the gospel itself will not be hurt by Christians violating contemporary mores. The gospel itself, the argument is then pressed by saying that if we today do not maintain slavery on the basis of Ephesians 6, 5-9, we should also not argue from this passage about the differentiating roles of wives and husbands, because we now know better than the first century Christians and Paul that they are on a par. That is, the existence of slavery and slaves, submissions to their masters, and the submission of wives to their husbands stands or falls together. Space does not permit a full response to this argument here, but certain remarks are necessary. It is true that these three relationships, husbands and wives, parents and children, masters and slaves, are dealt with here as a kind of unit. They are treated one after another as different relationships within the larger household, moving from the most central, husbands and wives, to the next most crucial, parents and children, and to the extended relationship that might exist in some households, masters and slaves. But if the argument advanced above is true, then it cuts all the way across the board. Not only would the teaching about husband and wives cease to be normative and fall away with slavery, but so would the teaching about parents and children, which is positioned between the other two relationships. The argument would have this effect by insisting that these three are on a complete par. But that aspect of the argument is flawed. It is assumed that these relationships treat one after another in this section are thereby placed on the same level and are presumably handled by Paul with the same kind of considerations. Further reflection on these different relationships shows that this is not so. Take, for example, parents and children. Paul appeals to the fifth command, honor your father and mother, Exodus 20:12, cited in Ephesians 6:2. To substantiate his command, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. That's Ephesians 6:1. Thus, Paul reaches back to a permanent moral command from God, given in a time and place much earlier than and quite different from that of Ephesians, as the linchpin for his instruction to children. Thus, the demise of slavery does not sweep this permanent moral command for children away, for the two relationships are not inseparably connected as to their essence, but only exist side by side because slavery fit into the larger household setting of that day. The inherent differences are seen also by noticing that no permanent moral command or any other moral absolute with reference to slavery is used in Paul's instructions to slaves. He simply gives them instructions on how to carry out appropriate work duties and relationships with appropriate Christian attitudes as they find themselves in the then existing institution of slavery. This is analogous to the way Moses is represented by Jesus as having given instruction about what a man must do when he divorces his wife. Because of your hardness of heart, without thereby indicating, as some then and there implied to Jesus, that Moses approved of or encouraged divorce. Furthermore, Paul elsewhere indicates that a slave could properly become free, and therefore he does not treat slavery as a divinely ordained institution, as he does that of parents and children, and as he does that of husbands and wives. For both the existence of marriage relationship and the roles required of each one in it are in the Ephesians passage and elsewhere, related by Paul to the creation account and God's decisive actions and instructions in the most basic and foundational event. Thus there is a great divide between husbands and wives and parents and children on one side of that list of household relationships, and master and slaves on the other. So I would even ask after this, what makes us think that our cultural mores or our cultural norms are better than other times? It's an assumption. Why do we think we're wiser? We're not always wiser than our foreparents were. I'm going to link to a video that kind of illustrates this. It's C.S. Lewis in his book, The Four Loves, addressing our culture, or the culture of his time, and it is our culture still. In our culture, where Eros has been deified, let's meditate upon Bible marriages, good and bad. Thanks for watching.